Hello, everyone. I still see people joining. So maybe let's wait a couple of more, 2 more minutes, and I think they can then can we slowly start. Yeah, and feel free to drop in a chat where you are joining from. We heard that there's quite a wide attendance from many different countries. So don't be shy. Drop in the chat where you're joining from. Sofia, yes, Minnesota. Oh wow. Bratasha, Samazik, Madrid, Spain. There was France, Mexico. Fantastic. Athens, Belfast, Montenegro. Awesome. So I will slowly start with some housekeeping announcements. Because of quite wide attendance from many different countries, we do have interpretation in Swedish and Portuguese today. So I will try to to speak slowlier and in a more clear manner than usual, not to rush. And also, I would. Oh, sorry. What did I say? I said Spanish and Portuguese for a translation. I'm already being corrected. Sorry. So yeah, but because of the translation, let's try to be probably more clear than usual. We're not native speakers, and sometimes we can blurb and go very fast. Then when it comes to questions, we have questions and answers box. So the way we will proceed with the discussion is that we will have um, each speaker will have 1 minute possibility, 1 minute response, and then others will have a possibility to jump in on each panelist's answers. But we will keep this conversation short, snappy, without lengthy explanations or presentations. So conversation type. Questions and answers, yes, go in the question and answer box, and we'll try to answer as many as we can. But if we do not answer all the questions, then we're going to follow up later on the web page that we have for the Better Than Burning campaign. And yes, with that, I think we can start. Um, my name is Maya. I'm from the organization Zero Waste Latvia. I am myself a communicator slash activist fighting several incinerators and incineration in Latvia. We have currently three on the horizon here in Latvia, and I'll be moderating today this debate, this discussion, this conversation. Um, Incineration, like in Latvia, but also in many other countries, appeared on the horizon in the past years and in a negative light, because for a very long time, incineration was actually seen like this magic solution for managing waste. It was promised to be almost smart and green and whatnot else. And then in the recent years, we have started to hear about the potential risks to the health, to the environment, to climate, also to the waste reduction and circular economy, because incineration locks us in to burning, incinerating things and not recycling or thinking about reducing them. And in spite of all of this, the incineration capacity has been even growing Europe by 8% every year. Um, Also, Zero Waste Europe recently and this week launched a call on moratorium on waste building new incinerators, because with us eventually becoming better on waste management, sorting, and recycling, we do not need that many incinerators altogether. But now, today, though this discussion about incineration can be very technical and often very scary, and shy away even us activists or people working in waste, zero waste. Today, we're kind of trying to nail the question down on the ground here from the local communities in more simple but also very concrete terms. What does it mean to have an incinerator or plan for an incinerator in your area? What does it mean to these communities? What are the fights, the tools, how you can, what you can do if there's an incinerator plant in your area. So today, the discussion will be really what the people on the ground are living. And today with us, we have a dream team consisting of a lawyer, doctor, and activist. So first things first, if you ever need a dream team to fight an incinerator, these are the specialists you need. You need a lawyer, you need a doctor or a researcher, and you need an activist or a communicator to shine the light on the topic. And here today with us we have Brex Arevalo from Gaia Asia Pacific. Brex is an environmental justice advocate, and he's working closely with civil society and communities to fight false solutions to waste and climate change. And he's licensed environmental planner in Philippines. Brex has collaborated with youth groups, faith-based and indigenous communities. Is that correct? Awesome. Brex will have fantastic stories to tell. Some of them are really impressive and shocking, but we'll keep that to the end. Amélie Bosflug is French oncodermatologist, specialized in skin cancer, and with the PhD in molecular biology from Huntsman Center Institute in Salt Lake City. And Amélie is living, working, and fighting health risks of waste to energy plants in densely populated areas. One of them is close to Paris in Ivry-sur-Seine. And Amélie is also working in University Hospital in Créteil. I'm sure Amélie will have fantastic insights in the health aspects of incinerators. Regina Stoilova and Zazemiata is an absolute legend. Regina is a lawyer, public interest environmental lawyer, to be precise. And in the past 8 years, they have been fighting one incinerator in Bulgaria by Sofia. And she specializes in litigation and advocacy around waste incineration, human rights, and has recently earned a PhD from Sofia University with dissertation on legal regime of ambient air in Bulgaria. There are very interesting topics about air pollution and constitutional rights, fundamental rights, human rights, and so on. So this is our dream team, and let's get started with the discussion. Probably the first question to all three of you is, what's your story? Specifically, I already mentioned some of them, the snippets, but what is your story around incineration? Why do you think that energy, waste to energy, is not a good idea? Why it's not a modern solution? And maybe what's, in one sentence, why it's the biggest misconception about waste management altogether? So maybe let's start with Amélie. You as a doctor, what would you say?
So my story, hello everybody, thank you very much for inviting me today to talk about this. So my story with incineration is that I was first of all a mom, and I was breastfeeding my kid when a study was published from the Collectif Trois that I joined after, showing that there were dioxins in the earth, and I was like, oh well, if there's dioxin in the no, not in the earth, in the eggs of chickens, and I was like, oh wow, if there's dioxin in the eggs of chickens, maybe there are some in the milk, and I was worried about that. So as a doctor, I was like, okay, well, let's call my friend specialized in that question to ask her if it was dangerous or not. And I call a pediatrician that's in charge of a lactarium where they receive milk from everywhere, and she's like, no, of course there's dioxins in the milk, in your milk, next to when you live next to an incinerator, but please don't look at it, because if you look at it, you won't close your incinerator, but you will make that every woman doesn't want to breastfeed anymore. And I remember that shocked me. That shocked me as a reaction, and I wanted to start in studying to know, are we in danger when we live next to an incinerator? And so I was part of the collectif, and very progressively I've become the president. And our approach to this incinerator near Ivry-sur-Seine is to, first of all, we did the demonstration that it pollutes. So we showed it pollutes the soil, we showed that it pollutes the air, we showed that the old incinerator polluted, and we showed that the new incinerator and the future incinerator pollute and will pollute. The second question is this pollution dangerous for our health? And that's where I come, and I will talk about that a little bit later on. And for me, the biggest misconception is incinerator destroys pollutants and destroys everything, like a mythical fire that burns everything and everything disappears. But actually, incinerator doesn't do that, and it produces fumes with many chemicals. And the problem that we have is that I'm worried about what we know, but I'm more worried about what we don't know, because we're always late to understand about the chemicals that are in the air. And often we focus the debate too much on, like, oh, let's talk about dioxins, let's talk about PFAS, etc. But I'm like, we took 30 years to show that dioxins were cancer, gave cancer, and for it to be regulated and to be like reduced. Now we're just about starting to understand the PFASs, and we're going to put like 30 years to understand exactly what it is. But I mean, that's only one part of what's in these chemicals that are around. What we also have to know is our trash is much more toxic now than it was 30 years ago, because there's much more plastics, there's much more PFAS, there's much more uh, like the number of chemicals that we use, like from the 80s to now has been increased by like 1,000-fold. And all these chemicals that are in everything that we use every day ends up in the incinerator and is burnt. And we cannot know the dangers of all these chemicals. And so that's why we say, since we can't know, we have to apply the principle of precaution, and not wait to discover in 30 years what's the problem with this chemical, what's the problem with this chemical, and stop incineration. Yeah.
Okay, that's a good first insight and first dive into the question. Thank you, Emily. Regina, now what you have heard from Emily, what's your comment? What can we do? What's your story around this?
First of all, hello to everybody that decided to take the time to attend this webinar. I'm really glad to be here and to share a bit of the stories we've lived with in the last, I would say in my experience, it's 7 and or around 8 years already that I support Zazemiata and Greenpeace Bulgaria in their fights against incineration. We did have some success story, and the one that you mentioned, it is indeed a success because we did manage to get rid of a project for a huge incinerator very close to the city center of Sofia. And Sofia is already a city that is having really serious air pollution problems. So if this have come true, it would have been really put into risk the health and the life of, and Sofia is the capital of Bulgaria, the most populated city in our country. But besides this I would say, really big success, we've also seen the cost of incineration of waste, because incineration is already happening in Bulgaria on a large scale. It is actually part of the transition from coal to other energy sources, and it's been presented as a green and sustainable, from economic perspective, solution that would support local communities. But what we see on the ground for years are people complaining from air pollution, suffocation, dust. We see how pollution actually impacts the life of people. Uh, this summer, there was a protest against one of the coal power plants that for around 5, 6 years now has been incinerating waste together with coal and biomass. And I cannot not share the image of kids holding slogans. I cannot play it outside. So we've seen through the years how waste incineration actually impacts the health and lives of people living next to these facilities. And yeah, if this is the story I would like to say to tell to you today.
Excellent. Many thanks, Regina. Brex, you come from a other side of the world. What's your story? What's going on? What's going on with the incineration in Asia, and what's your workaround?
So incineration in my country and all over the global South and Asia Pacific, where I work with Gaia, is incineration is burning. So it's burning and it keeps on burning in this region. Now maybe the start of my story really is somewhere around 7 years in my last job working with faith-based organizations and indigenous people, where on day one, my boss, who's a priest, asked me, the first thing he ever asked me to do was, can you check out if incinerators are good to build in an indigenous community? That's the very first question, the very first task I had in my previous job. And, I was able to see a lot of industry arguments for it. I was able to see a bunch of community-based arguments for it. And included there was Gaia, where I work now, I saw a lot of materials from Gaia, and I found sort of the activist lens very, a little uncomfortable to see for my taste back then. But I think a lot of things changed. I eventually moved to Japan, for example, for a few years, studied there, and I saw firsthand a lot of the incinerators scattered all over the city, a little too close for comfort. And one of the things I remember is really this narrative that it's okay to throw away your waste, your plastics, and everything else because it'll be recycled anyway. But when I looked into the data, I found that, well, Japan has one of the most incinerators in the world. 20, 30 years ago, it had almost 2,000 until dioxin regulations got strengthened, and eventually now it's around 1,021 incinerators across the country. But even with all these incinerators, and even with, I would say, quite a healthy segregation at source policy implemented throughout the country, we still only see 15 to 20% of all waste being recycled or being landfilled. 80 to 85%, all of that is incinerated. So maybe one thing before we move on to the next question, I'm cautious of the time, is I'd like to invite all the audience members over here to just Google very quickly, what are the top 10 countries that utilize incineration? And I'm sure you'll see things like maybe Japan, the US, Netherlands, maybe even Germany. And also put alongside there another Google search. What are the top 10 countries in the world that export waste to countries in the global South? Just please have a look at that, and then I'll expand a little later. I'm sure we'll have some chances in the following questions. Thanks.
Should we give everyone like 5 seconds or 10 seconds to Google? I already suspect unfortunate answers. But we will return to that, right, Brex, in the next rounds, because I think that will be quite shocking answers. But now, looking back at the core problems, like the most visible, well, no, not the most visible, but looking at the core, what's wrong with the incinerators? Of course, one thing that has come up as a top priority, and as you mentioned, Emily, there's so many things that we still do not know. But if we look at just the things that we know by now, and that the studies that have appeared in the recent years, and I would say many thanks to Zero Waste Europe and Toxical Watch for all these studies that are coming out, and biomonitoring. There's gradually data coming and appearing, and we're building knowledge. But Emily, tell us, what are the health risks around incineration? Why it's not all magic for human health?
You forgot France. That is the biggest one in Europe. So we're champions of incinerator here. So don't forget us. So yeah, the health risks of incinerator have been studied for a long while, but if you look at them, it's a mixed bag, because the studies are very different, don't use the same protocols, and what I would really like to share is that they often what happens is we have like the studies that were done on first generation incinerators, and then there's the studies that were done on second generation incinerators once we realized that dioxins was bad, and so we reduced the dioxins. So in old incinerators, what has been shown, and has been shown quite consistently, is, for example, an increased risk in non-Hodgkin lymphomas, sarcomas, lung cancer, and cancer of the larynx. And so that's the most frequent, but we have also seen a preterm birth in people that live near incinerators, congenital malformations, and decreased sperm count, also because dioxins is one of the most important thing that might be responsible for the decreased sperm counts that we have in. I think you all know that we have decreased by, like, I don't remember the number, but like 60 or 80% of our sperms has decreased in one generation. And one of the big causes of this decrease is dioxins and microplastics. So I think this is something that is understudied, but I think it should be studied really in an important way. There's some studies that have talked about an increase in hypertension and cardiovascular diseases, especially because the problem with incinerators is that they have lots of micro particles that tend to go very easily inside us, and so they can be responsible for cardiovascular diseases. And we have also shown that it has also been shown, especially in Thailand with very big incinerators, that in areas with children near incinerators, there's also neurodevelopmental issues. And so what you have to understand with health risk, especially health risk with incinerators, is it takes a very long time to develop. Like your lymphoma, that you will probably have it after 50 years of an exposition to your incinerator, and you will have it at like 50 or 65 years old in general. That's what's going to the typical story. But so the old incinerators, we have a lot of time to know, like, oh yeah, we have 50 years of exposition and they showed this and this and this risk. When you only choose to look at new incinerators, which I can understand why, because there's a very, very lower dioxin emission with new incinerators. But the problem that you have is that we are potentially falsely reassured, because the studies that are only focusing on new incinerators have a bias. Often they have like 10, 15, 20 years of exposition. And so when they show that there's no health risk, is it really that there's no health risk, or is it just that we're going to discover it in 10, 15, or 20 years? And this is really important, because what we have to understand is right now we're doing an experiment. As regulators, the regulators said, okay, we know the dioxins in high levels, that is dangerous. so we will decrease it. And we are doing pari, I don't know how to say in English, what do you call, a bet. We're doing a bet that, oh, let's decrease it, and we're betting that all the bad things that we saw with old incinerators, we won't see it with new ones. But unfortunately, health is not always functioning like that. Like, for example, I'm a skin cancer doctor. I treat melanoma. Well, the risk of melanoma is essentially due to your exposition to sun between 0 and 15 years. So you can then from 15 years old afterwards, you can live inside your house and never see the sun. Your melanoma risks, because there's other skin cancers, but your melanoma risk won't increase that much. So your risk to have a cancer is not always dose dependent. Like sometimes it can be linked to when you are exposed to that risk. So maybe decreasing the dioxin levels, but the problem maybe is not the quantity of dioxins that you have, but maybe it's being exposed when you're a baby. Maybe it's being exposed when you're pregnant. And so I think that's really important to understand that, like, when you look at new incinerators and the studies there is a bias. The other thing that is, it's a mixed bag. When you look at the studies, there's always one study that says one thing, another study that says another thing, and it's very difficult for activists to really, like, okay, what's the deal? What we realized in France is that in general, studies don't account for the very immediate urban environment where the incinerator is. And so for us, that might explain why some studies are like positive and some studies are negative. What we realized in France is that most incinerators are in zones where there's very few people living in the kilometer near the incinerator, whereas where we think most of the health risk is. And so, like, if you're in a rural area with very few people next to the incinerator, if you do a study, it won't have you won't be able to show a difference. And there's other incinerators that are in zones that are very densely populated. And what we realized in France is, when you look at studies that were done in very densely populated areas where there's a lot of schools next to the incinerator in a zone of 1 kilometer, those studies consistently show health risks. When you do the same study, but you choose incinerators that are in not densely populated areas, you don't necessarily reproduce those risks. So that's why I say, when you do, it's a mixed bag. There's some studies that show things and some studies that don't. Be very careful of the bias of studies that only focus on new generation incinerators, and always try to see, is this study done in a very densely populated area, or is it done in an area where there's not a lot of people in the kilometer around the incinerator? I hope that was clear. I have no idea. Like, yeah.
We will take more questions also at the end, and if some things were not clear, we can always answer. There was already one question in the question and answer box about the incinerator in Vienna. I personally do not know if that's a new incinerator, old incinerator, where is it located, but there are these very famous incinerators which are claimed to be absolutely fantastic. I think Copenhagen one is a legend as well. If we have inside knowledge, we will take inside experts at the end about these two specific incinerators. But I hope the person who asked the question already kind of gets the sense about the clean air around certain incinerators and how these studies are done. Regina, turning to you, you were a lawyer, so you have worked on different aspects against incineration from the legal side, human rights side. What is your answer? How do you see how well the citizens are protected from incinerators? We clearly heard from Emily all these risks and that it's a mixed bag. And many people are actually being very concerned, and their concerns are often dismissed like, yeah, but not in my backyard, the industry needs to advance, we need to do something with the waste, you all are just blah, blah, blah. So what's your stake, Regina? What would you say? What's your experience and what's your stance?
So on the question of how well the law protects us from the risks that Amelie just shared with us, and there are a lot, I would say that the law is the result of several factors. First of them is the scientific knowledge. And as Amelie explained, scientific knowledge of the incineration process, of the pollutants that it emits, how they react in the atmosphere, and how it impacts us, develops with time. And we could see that respectively, the law developed, of course, if there is the political will. And as Emily said, unfortunately, there is a lot that we don't know. There is a lot that we are uncertain of, and we don't know how much we don't know on these topics. But the legislation sits on this scientific knowledge. And the second aspect that comes is the political will. And what we usually see is that the law is the result, it's the consensus of certain groups. So we have the government, we have the business, of course, that likes incineration, and we also have the citizens that participate depending on the legislation process, but they usually participate as well. And then the law is the result of the consensus of all these actors. And as to just show the difference between science and law, I would say that I would refer to one pollutant, fine particulate matter, 2.5. Maybe a lot of you have heard it. It is emitted when we have incineration. But the current law in Europe says that it should be 20 microgram per year, the annual concentration. And the law that is about to be implemented and has to be complied with by 2030, it says that it should be 10, so in the middle. And then we have the scientific knowledge that is saying that it should be only 5. And then comes the enforcement. This is just to illustrate the difference. And then comes the enforcement, the control, because very often, as we know, what we have as law in paper is very different from what happens in practice. And especially in the field of air quality, it is no secret to anyone in Europe that the European member states do not manage to comply even with the more lax limit values that are mentioned in the very beginning. And what to say about what we expect in future and what is the actually what scientists say. So this is to say that although we do have some tools to protect our rights, they're not always perfect, unfortunately. And as we have participants from a lot of places in the world, I suppose that in different states, the situation and the laws, if such exist, they could be even worse.
Okay, thank you, Regina. We will take your case further because you have an interesting case. You actually went to the court as well, and also how to enforce laws and what we can do about the political will. Maybe we can discuss it at the end. Brex. So people actually wrote to me when I posted about this webinar. They were like, "Why would we care about Asia? Why is Asia doing in Zero Waste Europe webinar?" So Brex, tell us. What's going on?
Well, what's going on in Asia is that we've fast become a market for incinerators from Western countries, Europe. You have the more economically developed countries in Asia too, like Japan. There's the US. You can include China in there. And earlier, just to remind the audience, I asked everyone, you can do a Google search. What are the top countries exporting waste to the global south? And a lot of those top 10 countries are also the same countries that are selling incinerators in countries like Indonesia, Philippines, where I'm from, India, Malaysia, all over. Now, earlier, Maya, you asked me what is the situation in Asia? Well, the situation in Asia is we're a market. There is this misconception that, and I feel there's also a colonial element to this, a historical colonial element to this, where global South countries tend to view Western countries as cleaner, more advanced, and the ones who know how to address pollution and waste issues. I think that is a misconception that needs to be addressed, and it needs to go away. It needs to burn away. Now, what is actually happening over here? Well, what's actually happening is um, existing ecosystems, existing waste economies, existing waste ecosystems that have worked historically and do continue to work are being displaced by a lot of these false solutions, including waste to energy incineration. For example, in India, can anyone guess how many incinerators are proposed by the government? It's 500 at least. In places like Thailand, there's at least 79, one per state. In Malaysia, it's at least 18. In Indonesia, it's 30 plus, and the number continues to grow. And in the Philippines, where I'm from, where, mind you, incineration has been banned for almost 30 years, we're having at least 20 proposals in the coming years. There seems to be a new one popping up every 2 weeks. And alongside that ban, I actually did a Google search right before this. I was like, how many small incinerators are there throughout the country? And there's almost 100. There's so much market, we're being treated so much like a market that it's really getting uncontrollable. A couple more points I'd like to mention very quickly is, alongside this market dynamic and this colonial dynamic, is in these countries, you have poor regulation or you have poor regulations. For example, Regina just mentioned over there that standards are lower than what they should be. For example, in terms of air quality, the WHO may say this is the safe limit, but our standards are not keeping up to that. And another thing is, we're also a region where you have a lot of corruption, and I think that's a point that I'd really like to get across. Right now in the Philippines, for instance, we're dealing with a huge bonanza of corruption scandals that are being discussed in the Senate, where it's been revealed that virtually 100% of infrastructure projects for flood control, wherein the waste energy is also being lumped into, are being subject to 30% kickbacks. So 30% of the overall project cost of any given project may go to corrupt hands.
It is by all means a fantastic business. Emily, I saw you raise your hand. You wanted to briefly comment on this.
Yeah, I think what you said was really very, very interesting, because actually France, the reason why we have a lot of difficulty going against incineration is because we have a duopoly of two companies, Suez and Veolia. And the problem is France is very dependent on the fact that they're selling their incinerators in third world countries. And I mean, this is one of our like best industries that bring the most money. So the problem is, if we go too much against these big companies, well, then their whole money that they're supposed to get in markets that it's really interesting, because I saw it from the French perspective. Like, I can't go against them because they're so important for our economy. And it's really interesting to hear you on the other hand of like, yes, I'm receiving all these incinerators constructed probably by Suez and Veolia. And it's really interesting because we had a group from India that came to see us, because their mayor was flown to our incinerator to show him how great our incinerator was. And so the people from India asked us to write a letter to the delegation saying, please come and visit the people, the inhabitants that live right next, to have another vision. And so that's how we were published in journals in India. But it's really super interesting, because it's the reason why the market in Asia that you're describing is exactly why we can't go against the incinerators in France, because if we go against them, their image will be destroyed, and the economy that they bring with it will be destroyed too. It's really interesting to hear your perspective.
Thank you, Emily. I will have afterwards a question about the economy as well. But Regina, did you wanted to come in with a comment?
Yes, very, very briefly. I just wanted to jump in on how law could impact whether these businesses are successful or not. And we could see from the European perspective that incineration of waste, depending on some criteria, could actually be renamed as recovery and could go higher up in the waste hierarchy, basically meaning that law treats it as a better manner of dealing with waste than just disposal, for example. And the other thing is that when it comes to legislation and policy paper, it's really important on how we put in waste incineration, whether we say it is green economy or, for example, in EU legislation, some stimuli for waste incineration could be found in the law that sets out the obligation for emitters to purchase quotas for CO2. And basically, depending on the content of the waste incineration could be exempt from this obligation to pay for CO2 emissions. So we could see how actually legislation could very much impact whether incineration is, how to say, good business or not.
Yes, thank you, Regina. The thing probably with legislation and law is also, as you said, it's a matter of political will, and then it's also a matter of how you influence that political will and politicians. But Brex, I have one follow-up question for you as well. So, like, there are probably these marketing selling points about the good incinerators. That's marketing, but then there's the local reality. What is the disparity between the marketing and local reality? Do you have like any specific examples, maybe?
Oh yeah, definitely. So basically, there's a huge disparity. Whatever is sold to communities doesn't live up to the hype. Just for example, very recently, I worked with communities in Dumaguete City in the Philippines, where an incinerator, a pyrolysis plant was sold to the city, and it was all clean and green. It's gonna help solve the pollution crisis, whatever. But the reality was that there was just so much waste, and I think this is a great point. There was just so much waste coming from the city that the incinerator couldn't keep up. On top of the incinerator not keeping up with, in terms of processing, let's say 100% of the waste, the incinerator just kept on producing ash. And a lot of that ash was converted into, what do you call those? Chairs for school children. And this was very dangerous because we have absolutely no policies, we have no technologies, no capabilities whatsoever in our country to check if there are any toxic contaminants in these chairs, if there's any leachate, potential for leaching any of the toxins into the environment. There's nothing. We also found through a citizen-led study we did a citizen-led study using portable air monitors with informal waste workers and community-based advocates around the site for a couple months, and we actually found that the incinerator was producing so much air pollution, particulate matter 2.5 in particular, that I think, if I remember correctly, it was 7 or 8 times higher than what the WHO says is a safe limit. So we brought that to the city, and right now the facility is temporarily shut down, and we're working towards permanently shutting it down. Of course, you see a lot of similar examples throughout Asia. In Indonesia, you have a bunch of incinerators being temporarily shut down because you have like bad smells, smoke, and all that stuff. So the Dumaguete example I just mentioned is just one of many.
Okay, thank you. And Emily, maybe next question then to you. Your incinerator is somewhat famous, but there's a switch between the old one and the new one. And so is the new incinerator better? And what are the local, what do local people think about this new upgraded incinerator, and how are what are the concrete examples from the ground, the things you hear?
So we are one of the oldest incinerators in Europe, and we're the biggest incinerator in Europe. It was modernized in 2005, and it's really getting really old, and so it has to close. And we are my association. We started because we wanted to participate in the debate to avoid this new incinerator to be built. That's why we came in the public domain, and we proposed a plan to say, look, you're going to spend 2 billion euros on this incinerator, and what could you do with $2 billion to decrease waste? And we made researchers work on that, and we produced a plan where we said, well, look, with this money, it could be much better spent and not have to construct an incinerator, because we agree that not in my backyard is not we don't want to send our waste in somewhere else in another community. We just don't want an incinerator. We don't need another incinerator. And so we also did it on the legal front. We tried to confront all the legal issues, and so we lost in the legal front. And during all this is when we decided to do studies to demonstrate the pollution. And the difficulty we have is that studies take a lot of time. So we're starting to produce a lot of data. And so there's a lot of conscience in the people that live near the incinerator, like lots of media attention. Everyone talks about our incinerator. But unfortunately, the moment when we get sufficient amount of data is the moment when it's too late, because the incinerator has already been constructed. So that's something that Regina kind of talked. It's the difficulty between matching the political time with the scientific time, and that is very hard when you're going against an incinerator. So what we did win is that the incinerator will be half as much pollutants, as much capacity as the old incinerator. It's funny because it's because of us, but now they're like, oh, we decided to do this because this area is more urbanized than before. It's really always interesting to see the narratives. But so the new incinerator will be better because it will be half the capacity, so that is going to be better. But it's very interesting because they sell to the public, look, the limits that we impose ourselves, we're going to reduce it by 50%. It's going to be great. But the problem is what the current incinerator is producing is this. So when you decrease from this to this, like when you even if you decrease by 50%, you're still higher than what is currently done by the incinerator. So there's this whole narrative that says, oh, it's going to be great, it's going to be great. And we're saying, well, you're not, it's very easy to sell that, because it doesn't mean it's going to be better than the other incinerator, except for two specific gases where they are going to impose to be better. So we're trying to ask them to really be stricter and have stricter rules that will be actually impactful and not just communication. That being said, the new incinerator is going to be in operation it's in the next month. So like maybe they'll be better than what they are giving their own limits. So maybe it's going to be better. But as always, as what I'm saying is I'm more worried by what I don't know than what I know. And it's still going to be something that is burning waste, more and more toxic waste, as I said earlier on. And most of what it's producing, we don't know the health effects on the people that live next to the incinerator.
Yes, thank you. Maybe if I jump on Regina, hearing this, how would you comment? What can local communities to do, to actually to protect their rights? Of course, the laws are very different in each and different country, and it's each situation is specific. But you have had a good case, and you had strong arguments. How would you go around this? That we sometimes like studies, the law is very vague or it's old. What would you suggest?
Well, I'm afraid that at this stage of the webinar, we may have left the impression that, well, law is not good, it's really scary, and there's nothing you can do. But it's exactly the opposite. Law is not perfect, but it does give us tools to work with. And this is where people need to step in. And what we see for all these years of work with different local communities is that if there is anything that works, and it actually gives impact, it's when people step in and find information about what's going on, comment, when people talk to local authorities, and even when people go to court. And in Sofia, we did have success, but we also saw that even in cases where we don't win in court, what is very important is that we win the public opinion. Because back in 2020, as I said, in Bulgaria, there were a lot of proposals for old coal power plants to convert to waste. And we did lost some of the court battles, but at this stage, because of the huge public pressure, the operators said publicly they wouldn't burn waste. For a certain period of time, at least officially, they didn't. So, and I need to mention this favorite success story of mine, which is about local community in a small town in Bulgaria where a big incinerator was proposed. And this is the case with the most active people I have seen. They managed to gather 20,000 signatures against the incineration. They managed to provide a lot of expert information and they actually managed to make the local authority take the decision not to approve the incinerator because it would be too dangerous for other reasons. Now they are in court because the investor challenged this decision, and so far they're winning in court. So we are all with them to complete this battle. It is a year-long battle, I have to say. It's a lot it takes. But when people are active and when people persist, we can see these success stories. And I would just briefly mention that there are a lot of things that could be scary in these battles. First of all, you need resources such as experts to help you. You might need some funds to actually do all the actions that are needed. And also what could be a problem are potential fees, because sometimes investors want to scare us by requesting huge fees in court. But what we also see is that in such cases, when like we could be interpreted as silencing actions, also there could be a huge public support in gathering funds. So if I may say a sentence of how we move on, well, it's by being active and it's by using our rights and being open, publicly open about what's going on. That's what can help us win and protect our right to healthy environment.
Yes, thank you, Regina. Just to say, really, the law is something that can be changed. I think that is very important to understand. Every time we go to elections and elect politicians, ministers, that's one choice. But then, even if we feel we have elected not the right set, the law per se can be changed, and we all have a constitution as well. But it's a battle. So don't be discouraged. Those of you who are present here who are fighting their incinerators, it's a matter of long-term work, perseverance, courage, creativity, fundraising, and so on and so on. But things can be done. Regina's team has shown a good example how these things can be done and with success. But maybe turning back to Brex, your local reality is probably a little bit different from what we see here in Europe. maybe what are the things social and cultural that sometimes are not present in this debate? You mentioned already some, but what is the specificity of discussion around incineration in Asia?
So I think one thing I'd like to highlight in terms of the social impacts is really displacement. And when I talk about displacement, it could be in terms of physical displacement, like being displaced from your home. It could also be economic displacement. And by economic displacement, I mean things like informal waste workers who number in the hundreds of thousands, or even over 1 million in India alone, are being displaced from their livelihoods because of incinerators. So, for example, there's a proposal in Bangladesh, in the capital Dhaka, where waste workers are raising concerns around how they're not able anymore to access landfills because of the waste to energy proposal in the area. So they've literally been fenced off from their sources of livelihoods. And alongside that, the other social dimension I'd like to just to really highlight that point around informal waste workers is there is an existing system that already works in Asia Pacific. So for instance, in India, you have lots of waste worker unions who are doing great work on the ground already, who have been displaced by initiatives such as Swachh Bharat. I don't know if I'm pronouncing that correctly. Swachh Bharat and Swachh Bharat 2.0, which was basically bringing in so-called modern digital technologies into the waste and sanitation system to quote unquote modernize solutions. What happened was this was a total failure, and I think this is also what's happening in other contexts and all throughout Asia Pacific. I also heard, for instance, in New Zealand, we had a discussion a few months ago with an indigenous leader who sits in the city council. I believe it was in the Waimate City Council. I hope my memory is correct, where they were faced with an incinerator proposal, and what she said really stuck with me, and it's that indigenous people also have their own ways of dealing with waste, and an incinerator would displace not only, it would have bad effects not only on their land, the environment, but it would also have a very deep impact on their culture. And I think that's another dimension we could add there: cultural displacement. One last thing to highlight: very, very important, physical displacement. Right now in Manila, there's a proposal for an incinerator worth $500 million, and as we speak, hundreds, if not thousands, of informal waste workers who are living in the area are being forcefully displaced, and I mean, people bringing in hammers and everything to destroy their homes and get them out of there because they want to put it in incinerator. So you have all these different things: physical displacement, economic displacement, cultural change, cultural displacement brought about by incineration.
That is really impressive to hear. Thank you, Brex. But now we have discussed quite lengthily the problem. Maybe one last question before we take also some questions in the questions and answers is, so what can we do about it? I mean, to avoid the incineration. Here we're not specialists. Probably you are not specialists on waste management or waste reduction, but still, you definitely see things that could be done differently or could be improved. So, Emily, what would be your answer? What should be done?
Well, first of all, where I would agree with Regina is don't be desperate, because when you do lose your fight, it doesn't mean that you're not useful somewhere else. It's true that we were not able to stop the reconstruction of our incinerator, but people from New Zealand used what we produced to not construct their plant in New Zealand. And I think, and for example, on the battle of public opinion. It's the most important battle. And right now, what we have discovered here right now is I really think we won the battle of public opinion. We're like before they would give more place to what the incinerator people would say, and we would be like kind of the crazy inhabitants that don't understand anything. When we look at the journalist articles now, it's like what we say is really important, and what the incinerator responds is a footnote. So like I think winning the battle of public opinion is the most important thing, and how you do that is by being very rigorous, using scientists and researchers, and working with like using as much technical things as you can. But of course, things will only change if there's another solution, because what people say is like, yeah, incinerator is not good, but it's better, it's the best that we have. We have to deal with this many waste, and as long as you don't propose other solutions, well, you can't get out of incineration. So when you do your battle, you have to propose, in the same time that you're proposing to close your incinerator, you have to propose a solution to reduce waste, which is very dependent on where you live. So there's no good answer for everyone, because you have to, but what you have to do that's very important is you have to identify which level is decided what thing. Like, what is decided by the mayor? Okay, you have a program to reduce waste at the mayor level. What is decided by the region? Okay, this is the proposals of what can be done at the region. What can be done at the parliament? And so I had a meeting yesterday, and I was with a member of the parliament, a member of the senate, a member of a mayor, and a member of the region, and a member of the health department of a big city. And it was really interesting, because you have to talk to all those different levels, and each time see where they can play on waste reduction. Because often what people say is, I can't do anything for waste reduction because the people that decide waste reduction are over there or over there or over there, and you end up like really, and no one does nothing for waste reduction. So the first thing is to say the only way to do waste reduction is not to construct new incinerators, because that's the data is really proven that when you have an incinerator, I'm sure if you do the places where there's the most incinerators, and you look the places where there's the less waste reduction, if we want to do on Google search, I'm sure you find that the areas where there's the most incinerators, there's the less waste reduction. So first is to say the first thing for waste reduction is not to construct new incinerators, and then have a comprehensive plan at each level of decision to reduce waste. And that's only country by country, region by region. There's no like solution that fits all.
Thank you. It's true that there's not one solution that fits all, but what you're saying about policy mapping, who is doing what, and then calling out for solutions, and also constructing public opinion about lack of solutions put in place, even at the local, regional, or national level, that is something that has to be done. Regina, what's your take? What can we do, or what do you see? How could Bulgaria go around reducing waste and reducing incinerator capacities?
Well, there are two things I would like to say here. First of all, we need to admit that waste incineration is just the easy solution to a long process that went wrong on the way. And nowadays society, in most of the countries, we produce a lot of waste with what we do, don't we? And I could say for my country, we are not doing enough at all when it comes to waste management and prevention and circular economy and so on. So at a certain point, this is something that we as a society should demand our politicians to change. What we see nowadays is that politicians are very hesitant to propose, strong environmental decisions, because they're really afraid that the public wouldn't like it. So we as citizens and as recipients of policy should be the ones at a point to actually be eager and demand more environmental policy. In a way, we cannot just say we want clean environment if we don't change our ways. And we see that a lot needs to be changed. And the second aspect is that in a way we see in, of course, not only this, not only incineration, this is all over in societies, we see this retreat from democracy. Uh, Speaking for my country, there is really low voting rate in the recent years. And also people kind of become uncertain about their democratic rights and hesitant to enforce them. And I could say that this is the result is when we don't want to be part of the decision-making process, well, in a way, then we cannot complain from the result. So if we want clean environment, if we want healthy environment, well, there are democratic tools available to us in depending, of course, on the legislation and the state of the different country. But if we don't enforce our rights, if we don't demand the people who we vote for to adopt certain policy, well, these are the tools we have. And if we are not happy with them, I'm really not sure what we can do. But obviously, my my sentence and my message would be, well, let's use what we have. I think that a lot could be done if we simply enforce, if we simply exercise our rights and not just post on social media, but actually use the tools that we have in our societies.
Yeah, actually ask for change, but rather directly. And there's still so much margin for improvement, and especially here in Europe, thanks to Zero Waste Europe network, whenever we meet in the annual gathering, we have these different discussions and scans, and we see what are the situations in different countries. And as a doctor, we could provide a diagnosis to our patient and what they need to take as a medication, but somehow, due to the probably demand from the wider public, or because we're not so much high in the public opinion or the public debate, we still not heard enough. But again, Europe, it seems that we're kind of, even it's very, very different, we're still kind of very homogeneous region. If we would look again to you, Brex, if you would have kind of a magic toolbox and you could say what needs to be done, what needs to change within your country or in a system, global system or other systems, what would you say? What is the change that we need?
I think the first thing I'd ask of policymakers or propose to policymakers is, can you redirect finance from these waste incinerators, from all these different fossil solutions towards more decentralized, community-based waste solutions? So, for example, I don't think people would disagree if I say, if communities had $1 billion to spend on whatever, their waste materials recovery facilities, let's say a research center for analyzing waste, or even areas where you can decentralize waste while having fair wages for waste workers, I don't think people would disagree with me that the decentralized systems, they would work so much better while being safer and while having so much more impact to a wider number of people. So that's the first thing. And dovetailing on that, I'd like to mention, in terms of international finance, one key metric that has really stood out to me in the past 2 years is that 94% of all climate finance for methane abatement in the waste sector goes to waste to energy incinerators. 94%. So you got billions of dollars going there. What if it goes to decentralized solutions? And number two, I think we're still sort of entering into this era or into this stage of advocacy against incinerators. I think we're entering an era where citizen science is now more flourishing. Earlier, I mentioned examples from an example from Dumaguete in terms of community-based air quality monitoring, and now it's been temporarily shut down. This was actually part of a wider study involving Indonesia, Surabaya in Indonesia, and also Ogijo in Nigeria, where all three sites, using the same study design, using the same approach, all community-based, all found out that air pollution was just so bad that it should be stopped altogether. We've had a number of strides through that. Of course, a government may question the study, and I think that's to be expected. But I think it's a huge win in itself that now we're able to talk with government, whereas before they would just shun us. And now we also have members of the public backing us because they experience the bad effects from these incinerators themselves. So there's a slow narrative change, and I think we're maybe 2-3 years down the line, we'll be seeing a lot more citizen science-based approaches to dealing with incinerators and also other false solutions.
Awesome. That's really inspiring to hear. Thanks all three of you for these, especially for these last kind of inspiring answers. To keep us all and everyone going. I think we have run through the main questions that we had, but we have also a couple of questions in the question and answer box. I'll take the one that is standing in front of my eyes and just relatively, I would say, easy to answer. And it's from Milica in Serbia, in Belgrade. And he's or she's asking, what can we do with the growing amount of waste? The first incinerator recently started operating. Well, sorry for you, Belgrade, that you have a new incinerator that recently started to operate. It's true that European countries produce, some countries produce more and more, still more and more waste. But incinerator won't be the answer. It's the systemic change that is the answer. It's the separation, recycling, and so on and so on. If you ever look for the answers, Zero Waste Europe has fantastic answers to all of these. That's the aim of Zero Waste Europe, to work on these topics. Incineration is definitely not the answer. And I would say just one thing that always shocks me about incineration is the ash. And we're not going to go into percentages and everything, but what we need to understand, Emily mentioned all sorts of things that fly in the air and end up in the filters, but also when you burn waste, there's bottom ash, and there's a tremendous amount of that bottom ash, and that still needs to somehow magically disappear. No, and this bottom ash is either landfilled or used for something. This used for something, which is road construction or something, it's always something in some faraway country, Norway or Latvia or somewhere. It's for Latvia, we hope that we will find soon out more where exactly that potential ash could be landfilled or used for what, because it's toxic, and what can you use it for? So burning waste that can be recycled to produce toxic ash doesn't make absolutely any sense. It's an absolutely false solution. So Belgrade, look for systemic change. I think here we gave the, kind of a mapping, what needs to be done in terms of law, of policy mapping, raising it in public opinion, but incinerator will not solve your problem at all. And turn to Zero Waste Europe for answers. There's all the knowledge that one may need. Finn has a question about the opposing incinerators that leads to waste being landfilled instead. Well, no. Why landfill? It's complete. We need to change that mindset. The systems need to change. Let's say, instead of building a new incinerator in Ivry, how about France would get a decent deposit return scheme, for example, which would tremendously help? Or how about actually sorting the bio-waste at the source, or providing more waste bins to the habitants. These are extremely simple things. And while we're talking about incineration now for I don't know how many years, we haven't done the basic homework. We haven't done the basic homework. So the answer is not another incinerator. The answer is do your homework. Next question. Finn is mentioning these fantastic countries, which are Sweden, Denmark, Netherlands, and others, where incineration seems to go in hand with high recycling rates. It's a bit, I would say, to answer that, it's too technical for me. We can probably put that in frequently asked questions in debunking the myth, unless someone has an answer. But these countries do recycle a lot, but I would say that there are some hidden side effects that go together with the incineration. Once again, you're mentioning 5 countries. Probably the situation in each and every of them is very different. But you can sort waste, but not always recycle it, so to say. But we can take it in the this question and elaborate on it on the website. This is coming back quite often, I think. If anyone has anything to comment on these as well, please don't hesitate to come in.
In France,
Yeah.
we have low recycling compared to other countries in Europe because we have high incineration. And what you have to understand is that for an incinerator to function, it can't function half empty. It has to be like completely empty and full. That's how it works, and it works 24/7. And so when as a community you spend €2 billion to do this incinerator, you have a lot of incentive to actually put the waste in the incinerator and not do something else with it. Maybe there are countries where it's not the case, but in France, it's really typically the case. There's no market for most things that are for recycling development because it's so much cheaper and so much more interesting to put it in the incinerator once the incinerator has been built.
Yes, absolutely. And that's one thing about Sweden and Denmark. They do recycle. They have good recycling rates, and probably other countries as well, actually. But then they also take in waste from other countries. Because they have also incineration overcapacity. But we can really elaborate on that separately. Brex, you wanted to come in.
Oh yeah, I just wanted to come in, and I think in a way, for me, it's asking the wrong question, because at the end of the day, if you have an incinerator, you have toxic ash. And I think there was this one question earlier also in the chat that asked about areas with incinerators with clean air. But even if you have pollution control systems, it just kind of captures the pollution, and then all of that has to be landfilled anyway. There's really no way of making all the waste or all the ash disappear. Waste incineration is just converting trash into more toxic substances. Another thing, and I'm happy you mentioned, Maya, the overcapacity issue, because one very recent example is in China, where you now have a lot of stranded assets and a lot of overcapacity of incinerators. A lot of them are shutting down or not operating at all because you have such great recycling rates going on. And again, a lot of this is because of decentralized systems that are being supported.
Yes, thank you. Someone is commenting already on Denmark, but we'll take it. I think we'll take it afterwards. The tricky cases. Svetlana Stoyanova commented that maybe the problem is the immoral selling of outdated technologies for incineration by the most developed countries to less developed countries. Well, it's there's that, but also even here in Europe, young or old incinerations, outdated or not. When in Latvia we currently do not incinerate that much, we incinerate very little. I feel this is a pointless solution. We don't need it. And that's even in Europe. But I think in Brexit's case, it's such a colonialism, sending now the technologies while we have been sending also waste, and even wasting many other countries before. It's just morally unacceptable. Regina, you wanted to come in.
Yeah, just wanted to add a point on this. It's not just transfer of technologies, it's quite often transfer of waste itself. And even in Europe, we have this story. So a couple of years ago in Bulgaria, it was a very hot topic that the old Bulgarian power plants will be incinerating foreign waste coming from Italy and other countries, and there has been investigations on this topic. So in a way, it's again because waste incineration, as we see, there is a lot of legal restrictions. Well, maybe not enough, but there are some, and it really depends on control. So we could see that actually waste is being shipped to countries where control mechanism actually don't operate that effectively. And it is a big side of the waste incineration story. How well do we control it? Because we said earlier we have law. Well, maybe it's not good enough, but we have some law. But then in the end, what we see is that there are so many loopholes in how law works. And Brex earlier mentioned corruption. I guess this is a huge problem everywhere of how and it is maybe the one of the, at least in our country and from our perspective, on the ground, we could see that one of the big problems with control being actually enforced over power plants and over these dangerous processes, it could be corruption.
Yeah, and well, I would say similar to corruption, but don't be discouraged. Sometimes these companies who are promoting incinerators, of course, they have tremendously a lot of funding to do all sorts of public good projects, do the publications, explanations, seminars, webinars, and to form the public opinion. And of course, we as environmental organizations, we feel very small, but we shouldn't be discouraged no matter what. Stephen Thornhill had a comment about destroying valuable resources on the planet, and of course, and emissions. I mean, your question is I would say evident. Unfortunately, this doesn't make any sense, and this needs to change. And of course, we're all working on it. A couple of more niche questions are about. One is from Larissa de Orbe about financing of incineration projects and banks. Does any of you have experience with the banks financing incineration projects?
Yeah.
It's a very good question. Yeah, Brex, go on.
Yes, actually, very, very involved, but more in terms of the international multilateral development banks, Asian Development Bank, World Bank, Asia Infrastructure Bank in China, for example. And what we found, that just reading again Larissa's question just to make sure I answer this correctly. My question is about banks that incinerate finance. Have you researched this, and do you have any tools for accessing this information? Well, first of all, a lot of these banks, they do support waste to energy incineration take up in a number of countries, both in terms of direct finance for constructing the project, and also in terms of influencing policy through technical assistance, through feasibility studies, etc. Now, I happen to be working with a team on a citizens atlas, sort of a website to show this information precisely that you're asking for. Like, how do you access information around what incinerators are supported by World Bank or what incinerators are supported by ADB? We're working on a website that should launch by Q1 in 2026. That shows all of this stuff. And maybe one thing I'd like to mention is not all banks are very detailed or very open about this information. Sometimes it can be very hard to see how much finance was actually sourced, or sometimes it's also hard to see if the project is supporting an incinerator because it could be labeled as, let's say, an energy recovery project. But if you dig into it, look at the details, it's an incinerator. So, we do have trouble finding a lot of information online, but I guess with a lot of digging, we are able to access some stuff. Hope I answered your question, Larissa, and I'm happy to answer through email or something if you need a little later. Yeah.
Yeah, but that's a very good I've been following the incineration debate quite some time, but this question had not come up. It's very, very interesting. Thanks, Larissa. I think that's something we will dig into as well. Look, we need to kind of wrap up. We are a bit approaching the end. We have a couple of niche questions. One about airspace safety. Does anyone know anyone about that airspace safety in relation to waste incineration? I have never heard anything about it. So maybe it's from anonymous attendees. So, well, we can put it on our website if we find any kind of information.
I think that it could actually be, I'm not sure, and I apologize to the person who asked the question if I understand wrong the question, but because it talks about high stacks. So usually high stacks in installations are connected to air pollution. And back in the past, the stacks that emit the flue gases, they used to be built very high in order to disperse the pollution far away from the place where the installation is. And this started to change recently with the abatement devices, the devices that purify the gases. So now the newer installations have lower stacks because we have the air pollution devices, but I'm not sure if the fact that the stacks are tall somehow impacts the airspace safety.
Yeah. And another one that is very niche as well, I would say, is how about incinerators with laser-based technologies? Unfortunately, the higher technologies do not reach practical implementation. I haven't heard about laser-based technologies in incineration, but again, I hope that having passed together this hour and 30 here today, we can agree that incineration is not the fantastic solution that has been sold to us for years, and laser-based or not, we should not go into that direction and rather focus on better alternatives than burning. And we have heard them. If anyone would be still wondering what to do with their waste, come to Zero Waste Europe. We have answers, and there's also Zero Waste Academy that can also provide training and insights and many other things for those who are interested how to deal with the waste reduction and going zero waste. So I'm sorry to say we're not much fans of incineration here, given what was discussed to Telina. So I hope that we have covered answers today. It was thanks panelists for your valuable insights. As I said, I think in one of the preparatory calls, I would love to do a podcast with each of you. Each of your stories are absolutely fantastic and mind-blowing. And I think Brex was absolutely giving a totally different perspective to our usual European debate, which is very diverse, but still quite homogeneous, so to say. So thanks, everyone. Fantastic dream team. And I hope we will continue these incineration talk series in some other formats. Stay tuned for the campaign that Zero Waste Europe is running as of this week for quite some time, and we'll be focusing on the alternatives of incineration. And thank you so much for attending, everyone, and we will be in touch. If you want to receive more news from Zero Waste Europe, sign up also to the Zero Waste Europe newsletter and the social networks, and you'll be always up to date with what we have in pocket in terms of studies and other findings. Thank you, everyone, and see you somewhere else very soon.